Hey guys, this is Jacko Buddy with BreakBlock.org coming with you with part 3 of the basic level Game Maker tutorial series that we've been doing. In parts 1 and 2 we began work on our Maze Man game, which you see on my screen. If you haven't seen part 1 and part 2, I'll recommend that you go back and begin at the beginning of the series. You can either find those on BreakBlock's YouTube channel, or you can find them at BreakBlock.org under the Game Maker section of the site. You'll see them listed under there. Now, last time during part 2, we went ahead and we added some functionality into our game. And so a lot of what we did was making our little character where he was able to move and everything like that. And we put him into level editor and we got him to run around. And I'll go ahead and run that again just so we kind of make sure we're on the same page as to where we're at for those if you are jumping in the middle or if you just need a little review. We had our character to where when you hit a key, he moves and he won't stop until he hits a wall, and I can't change his direction until he hits a wall again. And we went pretty quickly the other day through how we set up all of that. You know, we did a bunch of variables and some conditions, and some people who are watching these videos don't really understand, you know, what these things are here that we did, what these code blocks are, and what these variables mean. And so what I'm going to be doing in this part is we're going to take a little break from writing new code, and we're just going to take a little study session of what variables and condition statements really are in terms of programming. And so if you're already familiar with programming, either from another language or whatever, and you're comfortable with variables and expressions and condition statements and all that type of variable manipulation, you can go ahead and skip this part and head straight over to part 4. If you do not understand it, then I highly recommend you stick with this episode, as we're going to be just spending this entire time going over those concepts. And so I'm going to go ahead and pull over my handy dandy notepad file right here, and we're just going to use this kind of to take some notes and to explain a few things. So one of the key things in programming is variables, and a variable is exactly as it is in algebra or any kind of mathematics that you do. Everyone's seen the little problem you do in your math class where it'll be like x plus 2 is equal to 4, and then it'll give you, you know, x is equal to question mark. Well, what's x? Well, mathematically we can obviously determine that x is equal to 2. Duh. I mean, that's nice and easy. Well, that is essentially what we were doing in part 2. That is a variable. We have a few different ways that variables are treated within programming. Okay, you create your variable, and we can call it x, or we can call the variable num, or we can call the variable dogface, whatever you'd like to call your name. There are certain words that cannot be used for variables. Those are called reserved words, and that would be a word such as actually x cannot be used as a variable name, except for if you're referring to the x position of an object on the x coordinate, because that term has been reserved for x. Or you cannot use the term, I don't know, like show message is a game maker function, and so if you put this, it's going to be expecting you to show a message on the screen, not a variable name, and so you can't use words like that. But a word like num, like I said, or we can do dog, or we can do John. All those would be acceptable variable names because they're not reserved words. And pretty much anything you use is not going to be a reserved word. Just don't use anything that already has a programming meaning. And GameMaker will let you know if you accidentally use one of those words, because it'll be very confused and upset with you, and you'll get a nice little error message about that. Now, whenever you create a variable, one of the first things you need to do, so if you do like the variable num, we're going to set it to something. So this statement right here, like that. This is what we call an assignment statement, and it's exactly like the term implies. We are assigning a variable a value, and so in this case we are assigning the variable num equal to 1. We could, like I said, you can use any name, so dog is equal to 1. This is the exact same thing, except you're just putting it in a different name, a different tag, or a different variable ID. Any kind of way you want to say that to remember it. This is what we call it in plain English, and this is what its value is set to. That's all it is. And so that's an assignment statement. Now, let's say, once again, we do num plus is equal to 1, And then we do num is equal to 2. That is not a 2. That would be a 2. Now what's happening here in your code, right here, the GameMaker stops and says, okay, I'm going to set num equal to 1. And right here it says I'm going to set num equal to 2. So what happens is that 1 becomes replaced by the 2. Num is no longer equal to 1 and is equal to 2 whenever it hits this line. So we could say, like right here, you do show num, and here, show num. And basically, right here, num is going to be equal to 1, and right here, num is going to be equal to 2. So the value changes every time you reassign it, just using your assignment statement. Now, another type of assignment statement, we can do our num is equal to 1, and then we can do num is equal to num plus 1. Now this is a little bit more fancy algebra. One thing to note in programming, the right side of an equal sign is always calculated mathematics, and then it's always used for the left side. So in this case, this whole statement right here is performed before any of this matters. Always. All of that is done, whether it's in parentheses or not. I'm just doing that to be symbolic. So what's happening here is essentially, if we were to break that down, that's the same as num is equal to num, which is equal to 1 plus 1, which means at this stage num is now equal to 2 because of that. If I set this to 2, well then this number would become a 2, and so now num is equal to 3. And that's also an assignment statement. You're just doing, that's a relative assignment. And so in GameMaker, whenever you use the drag and drop, there's a little relative checkbox. And that's all that is saying whatever value I'm assigning here, it's a relative value. So you're adding it or subtracting it to the value that already exists, as opposed to replacing it like you normally would. So, and you'll see these concepts more. It becomes a little bit to remember immediately. But as you start writing code and we can get a little further in this project, especially like part 4 and part 5, it's going to all click and make sense to you. But I just kind of wanted to show this for people that haven't seen it before so that you understand that. Now, another thing to know about programming is it always follows the order of operations. And so if I do 1 plus 1 times 0, well, actually, I don't even have to do this. If I do 1 plus 1 times 0, it's going to calculate this before it does the 1 plus. Because in order of operations in algebra, you always have your multiplying and your dividing going on before your addition and your subtraction. Also remember, vice versa, if I were to do this, parentheses are always calculated before something outside of parentheses in the order of operations in mathematics. And so if you're not familiar with the order of operations, you should take some time to become familiar with that. I'm making the assumption that pretty much anyone who's watching this video and is studying this at this point is probably old enough and far enough in their mathematics to understand your order of operations. So I'm not going to give a long algebra lesson here, but if you're not, Google it. There's a lot of really good math teaching websites and a lot of little sentences you can learn to help you remember the order of operations. But that is key, because if you mess up the order of operations, then nothing is going to work. If I were to do this, that would give me a final value of 1 plus 0 because of the multiplication, and then num is equal to 1 plus 0, so num becomes equal to 1. If I were to do num is equal to, open parentheses here, 1 plus 1 times 0, like that, then you would end up with num is equal to 2 times 0. And so anything times 0, of course, is 0. And so it would be a different value. You see that? And that's how a lot of errors in programming will occur, is you'll mix up these order of operations, and that makes all the difference right there, because that just completely changed my value from a 0 to a 1, which could make a big difference in a programming code. So that's just a few things about assignment statements. Pretty easy, normal stuff. The next thing I want to look at is condition statements. condition statements are very, very common in programming. They follow a very simple pattern. It's if, then, and then you can stop there, or sometimes it goes a little further and you can do else, like that. And there's even deeper levels, which is else, if, and then else. And some people are going, well, what on earth is that? If you're not familiar with assignment statements already, but I'm gonna break this down for you, and then it's gonna make really cool sense. And so let's say right here, I'm gonna say get num right here, and num is gonna be a variable, and get just gonna mean in this case that the user is gonna give us a number right there. So a user, I'm gonna do a little note here. User gives a number. Oops. I cannot type the name, I'm sorry. Alright, so they're going to type in some kind of number right there. So, watch this. We can do if, because we want to do a condition statement here. And you don't have to do parentheses right here. You can just enter a condition, but I just find it is good programming practice to always put your condition inside of parentheses. It just helps really organize stuff. So I'm going to do that. If you don't want to do that, then you're welcome to write your code however you want. But I'm going to say if num is less than 0. And in some languages, you have to put thin, like that. In GameMaker, you don't actually have to write the word thin. You can if you'd like, I believe. I normally don't. But what you do is brackets like that. And so basically, what's going to happen is everything that is inside of these brackets, I can put code here, and code here, and code here, and code here, and it's usually good practice to indent your code like that, so you can see all of this is inside of these brackets. And basically when this program runs, if I type a -1 for num right here, it's going to say if num is less than 0. Well, is -1 less than 0? Yes, it is. Do all of this. Or I can say num and put in a 1. Is 1 less than 0? No, it is not. So it's going to skip this line. It's going to go from here and go straight to here. So none of this is going to occur. And so that lets you do a condition. And so, like in example, I'm going to say your number is negative. Okay? And so if num is less than 0, then it's going to say your number is negative. Nice and simple. Now, okay, that's all fine and dandy, but we want to be a little fancier than that. So what we're going to do then is we're going to do else if, and then we're going to do our parentheses, because remember I always like to put in parentheses, it makes it a little easier to see. Num is equal to 0. And when you see two equals like this, that is a comparison. If you do one like this, that is an assignment statement, and that's always going to be true because num can always be assigned to 0. So you need to do two equal signs. That's another common programming mistake right there. Two equal signs is a comparison statement saying, is number equal to 0? If you put 1 equals, it goes number is equal to 0. If you put 2, it goes is number equal to 0? That's how you kind of remember that. So we're going to do 2, we're going to do open brackets, and then right here we're going to say your number is 0. Okay? So now we have nice little 2 branches right here. So now our program is no longer a straight line. Our program actually has kind of a shape to it right here. And you can see that because now if I type a 0 right here, it's going to check here. Is num is 0 less than 0? No, it's not. Skip that. Come right here. Okay? Else if means if this is not true, then check this one next. If this one is found true, it's not even going to check else if, which is a good note in programming because I'm going to indent a little bit down here. Make a little space. And if I were to do if num is less than 0, and then I could do if num is equal to 0, and we'll put, code here, and we'll put code here. And what will happen if you do this as opposed to this? See here I'm using an else if, here I'm using an if for both. What's going to happen with that is it's going to check this one, and if it's true, then it's going to execute this, and then it's going to check this one, and if that's true, it's going to execute this. Up here, it's going to check this one. If this one is true, it's going to execute this, and it's going to skip everything else within that same bracket of information right there. And so that's kind of the difference there. So this is only good if you want to check every one of your items individually. But see, if the number is less than 0, I don't need to check if it's 0 because I know it's not 0. So this will always be false if this is true. So what is the point of wasting my processor's time checking this one? So I'm going to go ahead and just use else if, so it skips it. Then you have your magical else. Nice and simple, just type else. Your number is positive. Okay, now, if this fails and this fails, else is what's left. When you have an else statement, that literally means if all else fails, do this. And so that is what else is for. In fact, I could actually do else if num is equal to 1 right there. And see, I actually have two else ifs, so it's going to check this. If that's false, then it's going to check this. If that's false, then it's going to check this. And if all of them are false, then it's going to do else. So else is your fallback. So like right here, what I could actually do, for example, is, excuse me, if num is greater than 0, then right here I'm going to say your number is positive. Okay, and then right here I'm going to say your number doesn't exist. So if the number is less than 0, then your number is negative. Or else, if your number is equal to 0, your number is 0. Else, if your number is greater than 0, your number is positive. Else, your number doesn't exist, because it's got to be one of those. And so that's kind of your fallback. You can also go straight, like right here, I'm going to use this as an example. You can go straight to if and else. You're going to say if it's num is less than 0, do this. Everything else, do this. And so that's a good way to check for if, say, you want someone to type in a number between 1 and 10. You can say, if this number is greater than 0 and less than 11, then you know it's going to be 1 through 10. Else, tell the user that the number's wrong because you wanted something 1 through 10. And so that's what that's good for. This is kind of good for error checking in case something wrong is put in. But this is good because it branches out your program. So let's look at the stuff that we wrote the other day. No, I don't need to save. Okay, so what we did here is in our create event, and if you recall, the create event runs when an object is first dropped into the room. So when you run this game and it creates object player, it runs create. So we made a variable, can move is the name of the variable, and we set it equal to the number 1. So that was that assignment statement. Can move is equal to 1. Very simple. And then we came, like say, to the left key, and we said, and there's our condition. You see that? If can move is equal to 1, then do everything. And see these green bars? I was talking about those as being blocks. Start of a block and end of a block. That's your bracket. That's literally your bracket key. They call that a block. And if you have trouble remembering that, remember that our group, breakblock.org, this is where we got our name from, is breaking a block. Because there's your start and there's your end, and I could put a command right here that says break, and it would actually jump out of this block. And so that's kind of where we got our name. But that's what that is. And if you look back in your control tab where we got all of these, right here, look, I have an else. Now, in drag and drop, they don't really have an else if. But one thing you can do to cheat on that is, and this is seriously cheating, you can do else and make a block, and then here do an if like that, And see, now it's else if this. So it'll only run this if this one is false. But that's not a very good way to do it because you can't do this to have 3 of them. You can only do that if you have 2 choices. In which that case, you might as well just do else normally. Or do, as a backup, the reason it's kind of showing you it's written code is when we get into some more advanced tutorials, we're not going to be doing this yet because we're trying to keep things nice and slow and steady for everyone. Right here though, I'll just show you, you have execute code. If I right click that, it brings me this box up. And I can actually manually enter this stuff and do num is equal to 1. Let's see, it's going to make my blah. Let's see. That's basically how it's going to go. As you can start, I'm sorry, I went to lowercase I. Fancy. I always forget about that because a lot of languages use capital. You just have to kind of learn that syntax as well. But you can see there's my if. If num is equal to 1, do this. And see, you don't need the thin in GameMaker, but some languages use it, and GameMaker will let you use it if that helps you memorize your code. If, then, and see, you can do else, or I guess, let's see. Oh, lowercase e. There you go. I'm running off of coffee tonight, so I apologize for my lack of my maximum capitalizing of everything. But see, so we have our if and our else, and so eventually we'll learn to use this. We're not going to go there tonight or even probably in the next tutorial because that gets a little more advanced, a little weirder because you're looking at real code, and a lot of the reason people learn GameMaker is so they can use drag and drop and never have to touch that in their life. So I'm going to be nice, and we're not going to use that for now. We're going to use drag and drop and be nice and fair and make things easy for you. But if you stick with my tutorials, you're going to learn to do GML, and I promise you, you're not going to regret it because GML is a very, very, very powerful tool in GameMaker that makes a lot of jobs in GameMaker a whole lot easier than if you're going to try and drag and drop everything. Because this drag and drop menu right here, look, this is just making our dude move and make sure he can't move in your direction while he's moving one way. And that's already 6 little blocks, and we're going to have like a scroll bar here before long. And so if I start adding more code in there, I'm going to get this big, long scroll box, and I got to dig through these pictures, or I could just have some plain text to read, where you can type in some comments, things like that, so you can remember what you're doing. And so that's, like I said, that's kind of an overview of variables and their expressions and condition statements. And so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this tutorial there because we're going to go ahead and continue working on the main game in part 4. But in part 4, we're going to begin to look at doing a few more things with our game. We're going to be making some traps that if your player hits it, it'll restart the level. And so there'll be a way to lose in your game. And then we may go ahead and throw in the exit to the room as well. We'll just have to see how long everything takes. Now, I do suggest that if you're not pretty close to being on page with us at this point, go ahead and Google variables and expressions and things like that. You can even do it for GameMaker if you'd like, or just in general. Read up on it a little bit because in the next few tutorials, we're going to start to pick up the pace a little bit, try and get moving a little quicker because we need to get this game built because I know some people start getting impatient and they just want to follow these tutorial steps to make the game. So we're going to start kind of accelerating things a bit and making this game. So if you're not on page, if you're having issues, go ahead, do a little research, watch this video again, whatever you need to do to really kind of understand what variables are and how you set them up and how you do a condition. Once you got that, go ahead and join me in part 4 and we'll be able to go on from there. And I just want to kind of add, this right here is my email for BreakBlock. If you have any questions or if you have anything that you would like to see in the later episodes, like if you want to know how to do a certain thing or you have a suggestion or feedback or anything, feel free to email me at this email. I check it fairly regular, and so if I get an email from you, I'll very likely reply or bring it up in the next video because I'm doing this for you guys. I'm not doing this for me because I think my voice sounds cool on a microphone. So go ahead, drop me an email, let me know kind of what you think and what you'd like to see in future tutorials. And don't forget to check us out as well at breakblock.org. We have other tutorials on other subjects. The other parts of this series are going to be on there as well as on our YouTube channel. But there are going to be written guides and stuff made for these kind of things on breakblock.org as well. And we're in the progress of setting up some forums for you guys so we can start communicating more and getting the community running. So I highly recommend that you come check us out. Again, that's breakblock.org. Alright guys, well, this has been part 3 of our tutorial series. And I hope that things are starting to make a little more sense for you. And I will see you in part 4 as we continue to make this game.